killed the market for, of course. So now this had killed the market for, of course.
I'm ready.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, watching me on Black Hot Fire Network. My name is INNOSSETU. I'm with my colleague Africa Maria. Um, we are going to take you through. Of course, today is a Wednesday. It has been a beautiful Wednesday, of course, destroyed by too much rains. As you can see, I'm putting it on this a kind of cloth because it's very wet outside, extremely wet. So I'm broadcasting live from Kampala, Uganda, and of course, just like I said, today is Thursday and it is 4th of September 2024. They're just 31 minutes past 3 p.m. in the evening here in Kampala, Uganda. I don't know actually your time zones for those that are watching me from different time zones. If it is morning, a good morning to you. If at all it is an afternoon, good afternoon to you. And of course, if you're watching me here in East Africa, a good evening once again. Yeah, if you're watching me on YouTube, it is your first time to see me on YouTube. That is Black Hot Fire Network 2 channel. Please endeavor to like, of course, and subscribe to this YouTube channel because if you subscribe in, you're notified about the incoming shows. Whenever we're coming in with something new, you're notified on your phone or on your laptop. Yeah, there are also Twitter family. There is also a big family we have on Twitter. For those that always watch me on Twitter, endeavor to like and of course follow this YouTube, this Twitter, of course, handle so that we can grow it very fast. Of course, because whenever you support, actually, you can support me through, of course, helping me out, of course, liking and following this page. Yeah, today's topic is of course it is a question. It is in the form of a question, which of course which of course goes to every one of us here. This question goes to every one of us here, and it says that Jim Crow days gone or alive. So someone who is watching me right about now, you might have not heard about the Jim Crow days, but in simple terms, I'm going to break down what the Jim Crow days were and what were the Jim Crow laws. When we talk about actually, before I go that, we have seen a lot of things happening in the US and other parts of course, Europe, and we have seen a lot of things happening, like creation of ghettos, segregation. We even see we see the of course people quite reaching an extent of calling out to the police for the kids, for the young black kids, which is something that is traumatizing. So we would like to know where actually this comes from. We know that our ancestors were taken through slave trade to different countries in the Europe and the US, but these people took these people for work. Of course, they worked for them, and really black people worked for these people. Yesterday, we were going through a topic of the black invasions, of course, that are not told what black people did, that the invasions they made, that but they are not recognized or attributed to these black people. So they did a lot of people to build these nations that we see today, that we call superpowers, that we call developed nations. These are people that were taken from out straight out from Africa. So um, now we see a lot of things, like a lot of segregation, a lot of we see a lot of racial racism. This is actually something that is not new in somebody's eyes. When I talk about racism, this is something that is done every day. Even there is somebody who's doing it right about now. Someone is segregating someone because of the color, because someone is not a white, because someone is not white, and someone. So a lot. So these laws were a state of local laws introduced in the southern United States in the 19th and the early 20th centuries that enforced racial segregation. Jim Crow being, of course, a pejorative term for enforced racial segregation. Jim Crow, of course, was of course a pejorative term for an African American. Such laws remained in force until the 1965. So formal and informal racial segregation policies were present in other areas of the United States as well even the several states outside the South had banned discrimination in public, of course, accommodations and voting. So Southern laws were enacted by the white dominated state legislatures, which are so-called redeemers, to differentialize and remove political and economic gains made by the African Americans during the Reconstruction era. So such continuing racial segregation was also supported by the successful Lily White movement. In the practice, we see that Jim Crow laws mandated racial segregation in all public facilities in the states of the former Confederate States of America, and the others, and of course, and in some areas beginning in the 1870s. Jim Crows were upheld in the 1896 in the case of the Blas v. Ferguson, in which the Supreme Court laid out the separate but equal legal doctrine concerning facilities for African Americans. Moreover, public education had essentially been segregated since its establishment in most of the South and the Civil War in the 1861 up to 1865. So companion laws excluded almost all African Americans from the vote in the South, and of course deprived them any representative government. Although in the theory, the equal segregation doctrine governed the public facilities and transportation too. So facilities for African Americans were, of course, consistently inferior and, of course, underfunded compared to the facilities for the white Americans. Sometimes there were no facilities for the black community at all. From equality as a body of law, Jim Crow institutionalized economic, educational, political, and social disadvantages and second-class citizenship for most African Americans living in the United States. So, after the National Association for the Advancement of the Colored People was founded in the 1909, it became involved in the sustained public protests and, of course, campaigns against the Jim Crow laws and the so-called separate but equal doctrine. By 1954, segregation of public schools, of course, these were state-sponsored, were declared unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court in the landmark case, of course, where Brown, the fifth Board of Education in, of course, in Topeka. In some states, it took many years to implement this decision, while in the Western Court, in the Warren Court, sorry, continued to rule against Jim Crow legislation in other cases, such as the Herbert of Atlanta motel. Of course, in general, the remaining Jim Crow laws were overturned by the Civil Rights Act of the 1964 and the Voting Rights of the 1965. So the earliest and of course known use of the phrase Jim Crow law can be dated to the 1884 in the newspaper article summarizing congregational debate, the term that appears in 1892 in the title of the New York Times article about the Louisiana requiring, of course, segregated railroad cars. So the origin of the phrase Jim Crow has often been attributed to the Jump Jim Crow, a song and dance caricature of the black people performed by the white actor Thomas D. Rich in the blackface, first performed in 1828. So as a result of the rich fame, Jim Crow had become in 1838 as a pejorative expression meaning Negro when Southern legislatures passed laws of racial segregation directed against the African American at the end of the 19th century. So these statutes became known as Jim Crows. So the origins of these laws that, of course, Michelle E says, of course, the reminder on this video says it was the start of the 5th of September. This is true. Michelle E. Yeah, Michelle E. Good morning. Though it is evening here, good morning, and let me hope your night was so nice, Michelle E. Michelle E says that the reminder on this video says it was on the start of the 5th. Yeah, true. Yeah, true, Michelle. True. So most of the articles, most of the videos I've watched the documentaries about this fake, these stupid laws, the Jim Crow laws. Yes, they state that. So we see that in January 1865, an amendment. This is the origin of of this entire Jim Crow laws. We see that in January 1865, an amendment to the Constitution abolishing slavery in the United States was proposed by the Congress and ratified as the 13th Amendment in December 1865. So during the Reconstruction era of 1865-1877, federal law provided civil rights protections in the U.S. South, of course, in the United States South of the freed men. So African Americans who were former slaves and the minority of black people who had been free before the war in the 1870s, Democrats gradually regained the power in the Southern legislatures as violent insurgent paramilitary groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, White League, and of course the Red Shirts disrupted Republican organizing. They ran Republican official holders out of the town, and of course lynched black voters as an intimidation tactic to suppress the black vote. So extensive voter fraud was also used in one instance, an outright coup or insurrection in the coastal of Coast Carolina led to the violent removal of democratically elected Republican Party executive and representative officials who were either hunted down or hounded out. So the gubernatorial elections we see that were close and had been disputed in Louisiana for years, with increasing violence against Black Americans during the campaigns from 1868 68 onwards. So the compromise in the 1877 to regain South support in the presidential election resulted in a government withdrawing the last of the federal troops from the South. So white diplomat, of course, Democrats by this time had regained political power in every southern state of the United States. So the southern white Redeemer governments, of course, legislated Jim Crow laws, officially segregating the country's population. Jim Crow laws were a manifestation of authoritarian rule, specifically directed at one racial group. So black people were still elected to local offices throughout the 1880s in local areas with large black populations, but their voting was suppressed for the state and national elections. So states passed laws to make voters, of course, to make voter registration and black people, and many poor whites began to decrease between 1890 and of course 1910. 10 of the 11 former Confederate states, beginning with Mississippi, passed a new constitution. Actually, last year Mississippi wanted to bring back this this kind of amendment. So, passed a new constitution or amendments that effectively disenfranchised most black people and tens of thousands of poor white people throughout a combination of poll taxes, literacy, and of course comprehension tests and the residence and record keeping, of course, requirements. So grandfather, of course, clauses temporarily permitted some illiterate white people to vote, but gave no relief to most black people. So voter turnout dropped, of course, dramatically through the South as a result of these measures. In Louisiana by 1900, black voters were reduced to, of course, 5,000. So on the roll, sorry, although they comprised the majority of the state population. By the 1910, only 730, of course, black people were registered, less than 0.5% of the eligible black men. In the 27 of the state's 60 parishes, not, of course, a single black voter was registered any longer. In the 9 more parishes, only one black voter was. So the cumulative effective the cumulative, of course, the cumulative effect in the North Carolina meant that black voters were eliminated, of course, from voter rolls during the period of the 1896 to 1904. So the growth of their thriving middle class was slowed. In the North Carolina, of course, in North Carolina and the southern states, black people suffered from being made invisible in the political system. So within a decade of this franchisement, the white supremacy campaign had erased the image of the black middle class from the minds of the white North Carolinians. In Alabama, we see that tens of thousands of people of poor whites were also defranchised, although initially legislators had promised them they would not be affected adversely by the new restrictions. So those who could not vote were not eligible to serve on juries and could not run for local offices. They effectively disappeared from political life as they could not influence the state legislatures, and their interests were overlooked during this time. So while public schools had been established by Reconstruction legislatures for the first time in most southern states, those for black children were consistently underfunded compared to schools for white children. Even when considered within the strained finances of the post-war South, where the decreasing price of cotton kept the agriculture economy at low. So, like schools, public libraries for Black people were underfunded if they existed at all, by the way, and they were often stocked with second-hand books and other resources that actually deprived them from learning even their history. So these facilities were not introduced for African Americans in the South until the first decade of the 20th century. Throughout the Jim Crow era, libraries were only available um, sporadically. Prior to the 20th century, most libraries established for African Americans were school library combinations. So many public libraries for both European American and African American patrons in the period were founded as a result of the middle class activism, aided by the matching grants from the Carnegie Foundation. In some cases, progressive measures intended to reduce election fraud, such as the 8-box law in South Carolina, acted against black and white voters who were illiterate as they could not follow the elections, while the separation of African American from the white general population was becoming legalized and, of course, formalized during the progressive era of 1890 and 1920s. It was also becoming actually customary, even in cases which Jim Crow laws did not expressively forbid black people from participating in sports or recreation, or of course, a segregated culture had become a common word within the black people and the whites during that time. So, in the Jim Crow context, the presidential election of the 1912 was steeply slanted against the interests of the African Americans. Most Black Americans still lived in the South, where they had been effectively differentialized, so they could not vote at all. While poll taxes and literacy requirements banned many poor or illiterate people from voting, these populations frequently had loopholes that exempted European Americans from meeting the requirements. In the Oklahoma, for instance, anyone qualified to vote before 1866 or related to some qualified to vote before 1866, a kind of grandfather clause was exempted from the literacy requirement, but only men who had the franchise before that year were white or European Americans. So European Americans were effectively exempted from the literacy testing, whereas Black Americans were effectively singled out by the law. So Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat. He was a Democrat elected from the New Jersey, but he was born and raised in South, and of course was the first Southern-born president um, of the post, of course, Civil War period. He appointed Southerners to his cabinet. Some quickly began to press, of course, for segregated workplaces. Although the city of Washington, D.C. and the federal offices had been integrated since after the Civil War, by 1913, we see that the Secretary of Treasury, Williams Gibbs, uh, of course, an appointee of the president, was hard to express his opinion of black and white women working together in the government office. He said that I feel sure that this must go against the grain of the white women. Is there any reason why the white women should not have only white women working across from them and of course on the machines? So the Wilson administration introduced segregation in federal offices despite much protests, of course, from African American leaders and white progressive groups in the North and, of course, in the Midwest. He appointed segregationist South politicians because of his own firm belief that racial segregation was the best interest of the Black and European Americans alike. At the Great Reunion of the 1913 at the Gettysburg, we see that Wilson addressed the crowd by July, the same, of course, centenary of Abraham Lincoln's declaration at all men are created equal. So we see that in the sharp contrast to Wilson, we see that Wilson said that, of course, in a sharp contrast to Wilson, we see that Washington B Of course, editorial wondered if the reunion of the 1913 was a reunion of both who fought for the extinction of slavery or reunion of those who fought to perpetuate slavery and who are now employing every artifice, of course, an argument known to deceit. So to present emancipation as uh, a veiled venture, historians like David Blight observed that the peace jubilee at which Wilson, of course, praised it at Gettysburg in 1913 was a Jim Crow reunion, and white supremacy might be said to have been the silent, invisible, of course, master of ceremonies. So these Jim Crows, hey, GB Jabba says, hello, Setu, Maria, and E. Your thumbnails work is really good. Thank you, Jib Jabba. Jib Jabba, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jib Jabba. Okay, Jib Jabba. Okay, Jib Jabba, it's okay. It's okay, Jib Jabba. But in your opinion, Jib Jabba, are these days gone or alive before you go? So now it's digital. Jibijaba says that Jim Crow days they are now alive, however much they are digital. Yeah, there are videos I've been watching Jibijaba where actually there's some videos I've been watching on Facebook and TikTok where I see whites actually certain white there are many incidences where I see whites calling out police for young black kids. Crazy. Where they're calling out police for young black kids. I was like, are we like, what does this mean? And actually, guys, you're going to allow me, of course, share this video. Oh, yeah, yeah. This video actually is 1 year old. The trouble is, many of us want to be up under them. Really? I was seeing a man who was arrested like a white actually, a white or like a certain white woman was moving like they were moving around and they saw this a black guy and actually they called 911. They always target the young. You will be mentally scared for life. True, true, Jibjaba. So actually, allow me share this stuff about the Jim Crow laws and how they began, how they existing, because there are a lot of things actually that are happening today. However, people don't realize that all of these things actually these people put in place, they are still existing even up to now. We still see these things even up to now happening. Uh, So let me try to share this stuff here. And so,
on an uncertain to amuse white audiences.
By New York Life.
With vision.
My name.
And surprisingly, there is something I realized. Ibijaba says that the police is the third arm of the white operation. True, this is this is true, because if at all, like, why do we continue to see whites actually making unnecessary calls to the police? They're making unnecessary calls to the police, and by the way, the police respond very fast. You know, in Africa, uh, uh, GBGB, the police, it is the police in Africa, it is kind of different, like from US. The place, it is different. If at all, like, I'm here and I'm like, I call the police right about now. If, First of all, the call may not go through the police. That This is Africa. If at all I wake up today and I'm like calling the police, the first disappointment I can get is like the call may fail to go through. Secondly, if at all actually I call and they pick, and I'm like, guys, my name is INNOSSETU, and of course, I'm seeing a strange man here. I'm seeing someone I don't understand here. He's standing here. The first thing the police will tell me, you can ask him, what does he want? That is the police in Africa, so it is different. Like, whenever these whites actually make those unnecessary calls, the police responds very fast. Terrible, 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 terrible. Jibijaba says fast is the government's second religion. True, true. Um, he says, in your spare time, research Dr. Neely Farah and Dr. Cloud Anderson. They go deep on this subject. Oh, okay, Jib Jabba. Okay, Jib Jabba. It says that same in the EU, police response depends on using. It depends on your zip code. It depends on your zip code. So there are a lot of crazy, crazy, crazy things. And actually, to get to know, this Jim Crow, of course, this a comedian was a white guy painting himself as a black, still to make black people look like stupid people. Allow me share this video.
Jim Crow, wheel about and turn about and do just so. Every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow. I went down to the river.
In 1836, Jim Crow is born. He begins his strange career as a malicious minstrel caricature of a black man, created by a white man to amuse white audiences. Jim Crow would come to symbolize one of the most tragic eras of race relations in American history, a time deeply rooted in promise and contradiction. 1865, 4 million Americans, slaves simply because they were born black, were now free. But in little over a decade, that promise was gone, replaced by a rigid system of laws designed to keep blacks from experiencing any of their newly achieved rights.
Gibijaba, have you heard that? And actually, this should go to all Africans. Like there is no way a Mzungu is going to be your friend. In this video, they say that of course Africans actually in the US and other parts of Europe were set free during this time. Like, you're no longer slaves. You're free to live. Yeah. Sorry, my internet actually, my electricity had turned out. Jibjaba says you used the real, of course, Black channel yesterday. He has hundreds of views on these topics. He's a good man, of course, out of Philadelphia and Resolvia, my state. Check out of the library tunes, the topics for you too. Okay, okay, Jibjaba. Okay, Jibjaba. Okay, Jibjaba. Okay. So I was still saying that, I don't know why actually Africans, like when you look at these Africans here in Africa, they keep on trusting these whites, forgetting
Black
these.
man, created by a white man to amuse white audiences. Jim Crow would come to symbolize one of the most tragic eras of race relations in American history, a time deeply rooted in promise and contradiction. 1865, 4 million Americans, slaves simply because they were born black, were now free. But in little over a decade, that promise was gone, replaced by a rigid system of laws designed to keep blacks from experiencing any of their newly achieved rights. It would be known as the era of Jim Crow, the American form of racial apartheid.
But I tried to lean inside and get me a cup of water. And those white people beat me till I was unconscious. They thought I was dead.
My dad said, as long as you're living in this South, you're going to have to go to the back door in this town. Now, you just settle for that. He said, but one thing I want you to swear and promise to me, that you will never get used to it.
I'm not ashamed of the segregated and Jim Crow experience, all because we were able to devise techniques for survival that permitted us to abide our time and to wait until our change comes.
As most blacks were willing to bide their time, some began to fight back. In the late 1880s and 90s, they embarked on an uncertain campaign to secure voting rights, build their own communities, schools, businesses, and churches, and to demand redress against mob violence and lynching. The white supremacists fought back. By 1919, the Ku Klux Klan, which had been a Southern idiosyncrasy, became a national ideology. White supremacy, the power behind Jim Crow, appeared invincible. And over the next decade, the violence against blacks would grow even more horrific. But black Americans continued to battle, using the power of the press and ultimately the power of the courts to pursue their quest for freedom and equality against racism. The rise and fall of Jim Crow is their story, the story of strong men and women who would never accept the demeaning, threatening, and perilous world of Jim Crow. The rise and fall of Jim Crow is the story of those who, in the face of unending terror, achieved triumphs. Triumphs that would in time make America a better place, not just for themselves, but for all of us. Conflict over black emancipation is as old as the nation. In 1861, the South left the Union rather than remain part of a country that restricted the expansion of slavery. At first, Abraham Lincoln saw the struggle as simply a war to save the nation. But in time, he would recast the Civil War as a war to end slavery. On January 1st, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all slaves in the Confederate States. 6 months after the South surrendered, Congress ratified the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery. The federal government had made a promise to the former slaves, these newly freed men and women who knew what they wanted: education and the right to vote, equal rights in the courts, and mostly land.
What is it that your people need now that you're free? Our people need land. and they need tools to work the land. So there we began to see the priority to own our own land.
Every colored man will be a slave and feel himself a slave until he can raise his own bale of cotton and put his own on it and says, "This is mine." Without independence and self-employment, freedom would be meaningless. Peter Hall.
On Edisto Island off the coast of South Carolina, thousands of newly freed blacks were making that dream come true. On land abandoned by their former masters and given to them by the Union Army, they had built schools and churches, established family and community life. But they had heard rumors that their future was at risk. Lincoln had been assassinated, and a Southerner, Andrew Johnson, was president. Johnson fought to save the Union, but not to free slaves. "This is a country for white men," he said, "and as long as I'm president, it will be a government for white men."
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child.
On October 19th, 1865, a boat carrying a deeply troubled Union general, Oliver O. Howard, slowly made its way toward Edisto. Howard was known as the Christian General, a deeply religious man who hated slavery. He was in charge of the new Freedmen's Bureau, established by Congress that year to protect the confiscated lands given to the former slaves, second only to Lincoln by free blacks.
They got the message from the Freedmen's Bureau that the general was coming back, General Oliver O. Howard, who they were expecting to hear nothing but good news from him because he was the man who had told them about how this land now was transferred to them and that they owned it and they didn't have to worry about massa no more and everything. He asked them to gather together at the church on Edisto. So over 2,000 people came from all amongst the oak trees and all back off in the woods and from their shacks and their dirt roads to meet there at the church to hear this new discussion about their land.
"I have been sent by the president to tell you that your old masters have been pardoned and their plantations are to be given back to them, and that they would hire blacks to work for them. Lay aside your bitter feelings and be reconciled to them. General Oliver O. Howard."
So people were enraged and people started hollering out, "No, ain't no way. No, that ain't what you tell us before. No, sir, no, sir."
"General Howard, why do you take away our lands? You take them from us who are true, always true to the government. You give them to our all-time enemies. The man who gave me 39 lashes and who stripped and flogged my mother and sister, who keeps land from me well knowing I would not have anything to do with him if I had land of my own. That man I cannot well forgive. A freedman."
Some went into "Nobody know the trouble we see." And some went into "Motherless Child," and all those things rippled off the sea.
Like a motherless child, a long way from home.
1 year later, in 1866, Congress, recognizing continued Southern resistance to black emancipation, passed the 14th and 15th Amendments, guaranteeing blacks the right to vote and due process of law. The time of Reconstruction had begun, but many whites did not plan on fulfilling the intentions of the new laws. Mississippi passed a black code, giving courts the right to apprentice former slaves, with preference to their former owners.
"The Negro is free whether we like it or not. For the purity and progress of both races, they must accept their place in the lower order of things. That place is the cotton fields of the South. Such is the rule of the plantation and the law of God. Governor Benjamin Humphreys.
But blacks did not see themselves trapped in the cotton fields. They used their vote to elect black representatives, sat on juries, and sent their children to school.
What had alarmed the white South during Reconstruction was not evidence of black failure, but evidence of black success, evidence of black assertion, evidence of black independence, evidence of black advancement, and evidence that black men were learning the uses of political power.
If intimidation would not keep blacks in their place, then violence might. In the same year that Reconstruction began, Nathan Bedford Forrest, a Confederate general, founded the Ku Klux Klan. The image of the Klan in white hoods killing blacks by the light of burning crosses would forever be etched in the American mind.
The way white supremacists made sure that ex-slaves would fall back into place or nearly back into place was terror. Beating people up, burning down their houses, shooting them, just the usual physical mayhem of personal violence.
Although they were beaten into submission and retreat, 1869 offered a glimmer of hope with the election of Civil War hero Ulysses S. Grant to the presidency, and Grant delivered. He sent federal troops to the South to counter groups like the Klan. But for the black community, even federal intervention was not enough.
The question of, should we stay at home in the South? Should we stay at home in the United States? Should we move somewhere else to the North? Should we move to the West? Or should we leave the United States entirely?
Feeling trapped and helpless and in need of answers, some turned to an unlikely source, an old man who had been born in slavery.
We needed land for our children. That caused my heart to grieve in sorrow. Pity for my race caused me to work for them. Confidence has perished and faded away. We are going to leave the South. Pap Singleton.
In 1874, Pap Singleton, a former slave, would lead a group of 300 blacks to Kansas. John Brown struck his first blow against slavery there. God must be in Kansas, and black people wanted to go where God was. No one spoke this call stronger than Sojourner Truth.
I have prayed so long that my people would go to Kansas, and that God would make straight the way before them. This colored people is going to be a people. Do you think God has them robbed and scourged all the days of their life for nothing?
Many of the people saw their promised land. They saw their Jordan River being those places that they had to cross over into, where freedom would be away from those who had basically had their feet on their necks all this time, just like the Pharaoh had done in the Bible. So many of them followed their leaders so that they could have their life to themselves, however they wanted that to be built.
They also believed in the God of Daniel, who was an avenging God. This is the God of the apocalypse, the God of the second coming, the God of the decision of who was going to go to heaven and who was going to go to hell.
But as much as Kansas loomed as a promised land for many blacks, getting there could become a journey through hell. Many would perish from starvation and exposure. One group fell victim to yellow fever, and there was always the fear of murderous whites.
I saw colored men and women cast themselves to the ground in despair, heard them groan and shout their lamentations. What is to become of these wretched people, God only knows. Here were nearly 1,000, scattered along the banks of the mighty Mississippi, without shelter, without food, with no hope of escaping from their present surrounding, and hardly a chance of returning from whence they came. Riverboat Captain.
For those who survived to make it to Kansas, they found a land of hard winters, torrential rains, and violent tornadoes. But through spiritual and emotional conviction, they sustained themselves. And within a few years, over 20 towns would be built. But not all blacks thought the answer was to leave the South. Frederick Douglass, a former slave who had become the leading black voice for abolition, opposed any mass exodus.
The country will be told of the hundreds who go to Kansas, but not of the thousands who stay in Mississippi. They will be told of the destitute who require material aid, but not of the multitude who are bravely sustaining themselves where they are. If the people of this country cannot be protected in every state of the Union, the sovereignty of the nation is an empty one, and the power in individual states is greater than the power of the United States. Frederick Douglass.
In 1877, Republican President Rutherford B. Hayes, who had won the election by making a deal for electoral votes from Southern Democrats, pulled federal troops from the South. The party of Lincoln had betrayed the former slaves. Reconstruction was over. Whites began to reassert their power over blacks, politically, legally, and economically. And nowhere was this change more crushing than for those blacks who were farmers, most of whom were sharecroppers.
Owners controlled their little worlds. So there was no police power, there was no federal power, there was no state power that actually made a difference on the ground. So you had relations of dependency built around obedience and submission. That was the ideology of the culture of slavery, obedience and submission.
Here was the black man, having very limited education, not knowing how to figure and to read, with the books being kept by the white man who is giving him his supplies to start a crop, and likewise owned the land. When the black man ended up at the end of the year and brought his crop in, the white man immediately arranged to outfigure him.
The man would take your cotton, and then the man at the store you had credit, he run the books up on you, so you didn't have nothing. You work a whole year and hand pick 40 bales of cotton and come out with nothing.
Frustrated by the unfulfilled promise of emancipation, blacks turned to the next generation, to their children. They believed education would be the key to overcome white dominance. One man would come to symbolize this hope: Booker T. Washington. Born into slavery, Washington had managed to learn to read and write, and at 9 he worked in a salt mine. But within 25 years, Washington had been a student and a teacher at the Hampton Institute, and was invited to be principal of a new school in Alabama. That school was Tuskegee. Arriving in a community of farms and sharecroppers, where attending school was rare, if at all, Washington faced a great challenge: to build a school, attract students, recruit teachers. On July 4, 1881, in the Zion Hill Baptist Church, the Tuskegee Institute was born. Washington and his 30 recruits believed the only way to one day have their own buildings would be to build them themselves.
The reason that it started as an industrial school was because they had nothing, and so they had to build, grow, and make everything, like harness making, because they needed to have harnesses for the farm animals, carpentry, because they needed to build the buildings, brick masonry, because they needed to make the bricks. These kinds of trades, printing, shoemaking, tailoring, carpentry, all of these things were things that they could use to build a business.
One student who found opportunity at Tuskegee was a young man named William Holtzclaw. His parents, especially his mother, Addie, were passionate about getting an education for their children. They even built their own school.
I remember my parents went into the forest and cut pine poles 8 inches in diameter, split them in half, carried them on their shoulders to a nice shady spot, and built a schoolhouse. There were no floors, no chimneys, and the benches were made of the same material.
Addie Holtzclaw would provide schemes that allowed William and his brother to get an education for most of the year.
The landlord wanted us to pick cotton, but Mother wanted me to remain in school, so she used to out-general him by hiding me behind skillets, ovens, and pots. Then she would slip me to school the back way, pushing me through the woods and underbrush until it was safe for me to travel alone.
Whenever someone had wanted to go to school, they would make sure that one of them went and that one stayed at home. Because if they didn't, if both of them were gone, the overseer would come around and would say, "Where are those boys?" And he would get upset. So in order to make sure that that didn't happen, she'd send one to school and leave one at home to do the work. So when the overseer came around and needed someone, she would call them and they would be there.
But the limited education was never going to propel the Holtzclaw children beyond the bondage of sharecropping, where if the landowner didn't cheat you, the weather might. William Holtzclaw heard about Tuskegee. He wrote Booker T. Washington a letter.
Dear Book, I want to go to Tuskegee to get an education. Can I come?
The letter found its way. Come, Washington replied.
When I walked out on campus, I was startled at what I saw. There before my eyes was a huge pair of mules drawing a machine plow, which to me at the time was a mystery. There were girls cultivating flowers and boys erecting huge brick buildings. Some were hitching horses and driving carriages, while others were milking cows and making cheese. I found some boys studying drawings and others hammering irons, each with an intense earnestness that I had never seen in young men.
When he first got to Tuskegee, he was really amazed that there were so many things he didn't know. He was also amazed as to how they organized the students in the dormitory setting, particularly himself, because he had never slept between 2 sheets. And when he went to the dorm, he was sleeping, as they say, ready roll. He had all of his clothes on, and someone had to come in and tell him that you have such a thing as a night shirt and a shirt that you wear during the day.
My plan was for them to see not only the utility of labor, but its beauty and dignity. They would be taught how to lift labor up from drudgery and toil, and they would learn to love work for its own sake. We wanted them to return to the plantation districts and show people there how to put new energy and new ideas into farming, as well as the intellectual and moral and religious life of the people. Booker T. Washington.
Washington's vision would bear fruit. In less than a decade, Tuskegee had over 1,000 acres of land, 14 buildings, a farm, and a dozen shops, from a laundry to a blacksmith, with an enrollment of 400 students and 28 teachers. Washington wanted his students at Tuskegee to learn to work and work hard, no matter how menial the task. He also wanted to keep Southern whites from feeling threatened.
That's why they thought Booker T. Washington was the great godsend, that somehow he'd come forward with an educational philosophy which said in effect that you can educate a people and still keep them subordinate. And he once gave a talk in a speech, and I think it's the most concrete example, where he was given the talk, and actually he was asked this question by a white farmer. He says, "Why should I send Mandy to Tuskegee to learn how to cook when she can spit in a skillet and know whether it's hot?" And Washington's response was, the purpose of industrial education is to teach her not to spit in the skillet, not to teach her to be something other than a cook, but to be a better cook, to be a better sharecropper, to be a better mine worker. And so whites really, thought this is a godsend. We now come up with a philosophy of education that can keep people in their place and even teach them to be better within their place. And they thought that that was possible. They learned very quickly that that was not possible.
At the Haynes School in Augusta, Georgia, its founder, Lucy Laney, would expand Washington's philosophy of teaching and take it in a different direction. She insisted upon developing her children's full potential. Her students studied English, mathematics, history, chemistry, physics, psychology, sociology, French, and German. What we need to develop, Laney said, is minds, not hands. Race leaders, not followers. Laney was especially interested in training young Black women to be teachers.
The educated Negro woman is needed in the kindergarten and primary school, but in the high school and the college, she may give advice and knowledge that will change a whole community and start its people on the upward way.
African-American women were playing a much more critical role than what was common in American education generally. They were critical as educational leaders, but even within the trenches in local communities, in terms of fundraising and teaching and support groups, that you cannot really understand the development of African-American education without really appreciating the leadership of African-American women.
Teaching was a very important profession for Black women in this period of time. It was not just a profession, but it was a mission to uplift African Americans, to teach people to read, to also teach them the ways of this world as free people.
But Black teachers had to show real ingenuity. Black schools were often barren affairs with few books, maps, pencils, or pens.
We had students draw the national flag on the blackboard. These flags were assigned a place of honor on the board and became a permanent picture in the room for years. Pupils were careful not to erase the flag when they erased the blackboard.
The positive image of Laney and others was hopeful, but the reality for most Blacks was hard, back-breaking work and servitude.
I've been a factory hand, janitor, porter, and butler, and wiping engines on the railroad. I worked as a helper for a carpenter and laying bricks for masons. I've been a driver of teams, a pick and shovel man, and drove steel for a section boss. I was a hand on the Mississippi and working in a steel foundry, and seemed like I did 100 more jobs.
My grandma would work in the tub washing the clothes of the prominent white people of our city. And for all of that washing, for the whole white family, washing and then ironing, she got $1.50 for the whole family laundry at the end of it. So there were several families that she had, but it was just $1.50 for all of that work.
White folks didn't have no feeling for you. They pretended they did. They had nannies to give their child comfort. That was my name, Nanny. They would teach their children they were better than you. You was giving them all that love, and you'd hear them say, "You're not supposed to love Nanny. Nanny's a nigger." And they would say it so nasty till it would cut your heart out almost, and you couldn't say a mumbling word. A woman knows how to shift a smile when the burden is so heavy. Know how to smile when she want to cry. Smile when sorrow done touch her so deeply. So that's why I feel Black women in the field had to pray and had to moan and had to cry. Them prayers went a long way and protected a lot of people. And God wiped away those tears. And the next morning, we had the strength to go on. Dorothy Bolden.
But despite all the obstacles, Blacks began to rise. More Blacks were being educated. There was now a growing Black middle class. And the children of the former slaves were not too quick to bow down to the white man as their parents had.
Whites perceived a new generation of Black Southerners, the sons and the daughters and the grandsons and granddaughters of the former slaves, who had not been disciplined by slavery, who had never known slavery, who were perceived as much more restless and obviously much more threatening because, unlike some of their parents and grandparents, they seemed less afraid of whites.
We are not the Negro from whom the chains of slavery fell a quarter of a century ago. Most assuredly not. We are now qualified as being the equal of whites and should be treated as such.
Every time we see a Negro physician, it does us good. When we see a Negro pharmacist, it goes still better. When we see the lawyers, professors, bank presidents, inventors, machinists, mechanics, we grin as much as our mouth will allow and shout, "The Negro is coming." Editor, Richmond Planet.
Many whites feared since the end of slavery that blacks would come to feel they were equal to whites. Now that fear seemed realized.
The colored race is getting more unreliable. Freedom has ruined them in every way. Only the old-timey darkies can be trusted. The young ones are sullen and grow more insolent every day.
They don't sing as they used to. You should have known the old days of the plantation. Every year it seems they're losing more and more of their own confessed good humor. I sometimes feel I don't know them anymore. They've grown so glum and serious. So I'm free to say I'm scared of them.
Nowhere was this fear more pronounced than in Memphis, Tennessee, where in the 1880s, 40% of the population was black. Faced with this growing black presence, whites demanded that the informal practices, which had segregated the races since 1865, become legalized and strictly enforced.
The laws were intended to accomplish what it was clear the conventions were not going to accomplish, which was, again, to make African Americans act inferior. Again, if white people couldn't make African Americans be inferior, they couldn't prevent some of them from attaining a kind of middle-class status despite the violence and despite the discrimination, then they could make them act inferior.
These forced acts of humiliation began to manifest themselves on the Southern Railroad lines. Special Jim Crow cars were set aside on trains for black men and women, and for those white men who wanted to smoke and drink. In 1884, Ida B. Wells, a young teacher from Memphis, was quietly reading in a first-class car when the conductor ordered her to move to the Jim Crow car.
I refused, saying the forward car was a smoker and I was in the ladies' car. I proposed to stay. He tried to drag me out of my seat, but the moment he caught hold of my arm, I fastened my teeth on the back of his hand. Ida B. Wells.
They are able to get her out of the seat, but she refuses to go into that accommodation car. And she gets off the train, walks back to town with her dress torn, with her hat now askew. She will sue the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway. She takes this mighty corporation to court, and she does prevail in the end, because the judge does say that indeed she was a lady. She's a school teacher. She was dressed the way she was supposed to dress. She acted accordingly.
But the victory was short-lived. The verdict was overturned by a Tennessee appeals court.
I had firmly believed all along that the law was on our side and would give us justice. I feel shorn of that belief and utterly discouraged. If it were possible, I would gather the race in my arms and fly away with them. God, is there no redress, no peace, no justice for us? Teach us what to do, for I am sorely, bitterly disgusted.
She said, I wanted so badly to do something great for my people, and I thought I had. But now with this, I feel that the justice is no longer on our side.
Inspired by her personal confrontation with Jim Crow, Wells decided to fight for the rights of all black people. She taught school by day, and at night wrote newspaper articles under the
2020 under the category According to an article written by Jody S. Cohen of ProPublica on July 14, 2020, under the category, it states, quote, a teenager didn't do her online schoolwork, so a judge sent her to juvenile detention. This article details how a 15-year-old child by the name of Grace of Pontiac, Michigan, was arrested because she was unable to abruptly adjust to the brand new quarantine settings of her school. Mind you that this exact same thing happened to many schools across the nation, where the students and their teachers were forced to continue with schooling, but only by way of the internet at their homes. To those of you who may not be aware of how a child reacts to sudden life changes, just imagine your child attending his or her school for the very first time. Getting up early in the day, getting used to seeing new faces of other children and their teachers, adapting to conversing with strangers, speaking out loud in front of everyone that they just met, and many other things that a child will go through when learning how to adjust to being forced into unwanted places. So, if the child is used to the normal routine of his or her school, then abruptly things change to the point where they now have to stay home and take classes online, then it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that it will take some time for any child to adjust to any brand new life changes. Right? But for some strange reason, this particular judge wanted Grace in jail for not adjusting fast enough. According to this ProPublica article, on April 21st, 2020, Judge Mary Ellen Brennan sentenced Grace to, quote, intensive probation, which included a GPS tether, regular check-ins with a court caseworker, counseling, no phone, and the use of the school laptop for educational purposes only. Grace also was required to do her schoolwork. At the end of the hearing, the judge stated, quote, I hope that she upholds her end of the bargain. So while Grace began the start of her probation, Birmingham, Michigan Public Schools Superintendent, Dr. Wanda Cook Robinson, asked families for patience as schools moved to online curriculums and promised flexibility in their supports. Prior to any of this occurring, Grace was already a high school sophomore that had nearly perfect attendance. But her mother was worried about this all of a sudden change with her schooling because Grace would now miss receiving in-person support from her teachers, which is needed according to her mother, because of Grace's history of having a mood disorder and symptoms of ADHD. Grace's school, Groves High School, made a supportive promise to Grace and her mother called the Individualized Education Plan, which required teachers of Groves High School to, quote, periodically check in to make sure Grace was on task and clarify the material. And it allowed her extra time to complete assignments and tests. But according to Grace's mother, once remote learning began, she didn't get any of those supports from her school. Now, on April 24th, 2020, which was just 3 days after the court hearing, Grace was assigned a brand new caseworker named Rachel Giroux, in which Rachel made notes in her file that Grace was doing well and reported no issues at home. But then the following week came, and Grace informed Rachel that she felt overwhelmed, forgetting to plug in her computer, and her alarm clock didn't go off, so she overslept. Grace's mother stated that she felt overwhelmed as well, adjusting to all of these new settings at home. Rachel's notes stated, quote, worker, who is Rachel, told mother that child is not going to be perfect and that teenagers aren't always easy to work with, but you have to give them the opportunity to change. Child needs time to adjust to this new normal of being on probation and doing work from home, end quote. Then, exactly 5 days later, out of nowhere, the caseworker, Rachel Giroux, filed a violation of probation against Grace for not doing her schoolwork, telling the prosecutor that she planned to ask the judge to detain Grace because she, quote, clearly doesn't want to abide by the rules in the community. Keep in mind that Rachel is the caseworker and not Grace's teacher. In fact, Rachel immediately filed the violation of probation against Grace 3 days prior to contacting Grace's actual teacher, Catherine Tarfe, to confirm whether she was meeting her academic requirements or not. Attempting to find any evidence against Grace, Rachel emailed her teacher asking, quote, is there a certain percentage of a class she's supposed to be completing a day, week? And Catherine replied stating that Grace is, quote, not out of alignment with most of my other students. Let me be clear that this is no one's fault because we did not see this unprecedented global coming. Grace has a strong desire to do well. She is trying to get to the other side of a steep learning curve mountain, and we have a plan for her to get there. End quote. ProPublica and other reporters attempted to reach out to Grace's teacher, Catherine, for comments, but Catherine informed them that she was not allowed to discuss Grace's case. So on May 14th, 2020, was the day of the violation of probation hearing at the Oakland County Courthouse, at a time when the family division was hearing only, quote, essential emergency matters, in which Grace's case was the only one heard in person in the courthouse that day. Listen closely. With concerns about his health, Grace's attorney, Jonathan Burnett, participated via Zoom and not in person, and he informed the judge that it will be difficult to represent Grace without actually being there. But he did not want to request a postponement because her family was worried about Grace being possibly detained until the next court date. The prosecution called for its only witness to the stand, that being the caseworker, Rachel Giroux. And in response to questions from Grace's attorney, Rachel acknowledged that she did not know what type of educational disabilities Grace had, and she did not answer a question about accommodations those disabilities might require. Rachel said that her assessment that Grace hadn't done her schoolwork was based on a comment her mother made to her teacher, in which the mother testified she said in a moment of frustration and was untrue. According to the prosecutor, Grace's special education teacher, Catherine, could have provided more information and planned to testify, but had to leave the hearing to teach a class. Judge Mary Ellen Brennan found that Grace was in violation of probation for not submitting schoolwork and ordered that she be detained at Children's Village in Oakland County, Michigan. After nearly approaching 3 months of being detained in Children's Village, Grace was released on July 31st, 2020. Grace's attorneys, John Burnett and Siam Khalil, talked to reporters upon her release from being incarcerated.
System needs to recognize that that's what mom was doing when she was reaching out to the probation officer is, hey, I need help, not, hey, take my kid and lock them up. That was never what mom was seeking.
Now, this should make you ask some serious questions. Like, why would the government mistake Grace's mother's cries for help as meaning she's an unfit mother and her child should be taken away from her? How could Grace be labeled as a threat to the community and the community benefits from her removal of living under her mother's roof as her child? Is it really benefiting the community, or is it really benefiting someone else? Looking at this from a broader perspective, these types of governmental actions are a nod to the uncommonly known set of individual state laws called the Black Codes of 1865, not to be confused with the segregation laws that were later nicknamed as Jim Crow laws. The Black Codes of 1865 are a set of standards or policies in which each state government individually followed religiously. These particular policies deal with civil rights, labor contracts, vagrancy, apprenticeship, crimes, punishment, and other restrictions against American Indians. But its main focus was on education and apprenticeship, but not for adults. This was strictly about control and indoctrinating the mindsets of the Indian children. Because it was said that if you teach or train a child how to be a better servant, then that child will grow into his adulthood wanting to be a better servant. As a manipulative means to legally force American Indians
So, there are a lot of things, of course, that are happening today. But of course, assure the existence of these laws that, of course, that were created a long time back in the 1860s in the US. I've seen a lot of videos where I see actually white people calling out police for black kids. And a lot of segregation. When you look at USA as a country, as a continent, USA, because you have the north and south. When we look at USA, there is a lot of division within USA. There is actually creation of actually different groups. When you look at the black people within the USA, they are living in different, of course, in different areas. When you look at the whites, they're also living in different areas. Actually, however much they pretend to be, of course, pretending like services are enjoyed equally. Kubanga, when they introduced those rules, ezo simanya Jim Crow laws, those obisomyeko n'obiraba. Balina akantu ke bagamba mbu like people must be separate but equal.
How can you be separate but equal?
Separate but equal. Of which wotunulila, if you look at things today, of course in the US, this is a manifestation of these laws that happened actually sometime back in the US, when you look at them critically with your two eyes, these things have not ended. These things still, of course, happen.
Exist. Obuki?
Tobulaba bwetala ku kamera.
Obuvuddewa.
Buli mu nnyumba.
Wagize ova? Zinyogoga. Zinyogoga. Engoye zinyogoga.
Bwe buzireeta. Oyagala kwogerako?
Of course.
Eh?
Kanjogereko katono.
Start
with Freddie Gray. And you cannot start even with the police department in Baltimore. You have to start with the fact that that is a community that was wrecked by so-called urban renewal. That was violence. When they come in and they put the interstate through your community, and they knock down your business, and they knock down your apartments, and they make folks huddle into small crowded housing, and they essentially lock them in a holding pen. I mean, we talk about housing and education. We talk about neighborhoods as if it's not about racism. We act like folks just ended up where they ended up. But let's be clear, this thing that we in this country call the ghetto, that was created. And it wasn't created by Black people, and it wasn't created by poor people. It was created by folks who were usually not Black and definitely not poor as a holding pen for the people they didn't want to live amongst them. So we have to be prepared to call that violence. If you don't call zoning laws and redlining violence, even though it does violence, and you don't call it racism, then how are we going to solve that?
A boy last week, he was 16 in San Francisco, told me on television. Thank God we got him to talk. Maybe somebody will start to listen. He said, I got no country, I've got no flag. Now he's only 16 years old. And I couldn't say you do. I don't have any evidence to prove it does. This house, because Glasgow is engaging as all, most northern cities now are engaged in something called urban renewal. It means moving Negroes out. It means Negro removal. That is what it means. And the federal government is an accomplice to this fact. Now we're talking about human beings. It's not such a thing as a monolithic wall or some abstraction called the Negro problem. These Negro boys and girls who at 16 and 17 don't believe the country means anything that it says, don't feel they have any place here on the basis of the performance of the entire country.
But now, Jim...
No, am I exaggerating?
No, I certainly could not say that you're exaggerating.
That program called Urban Renewal was not urban renewal. It was Black removal. And that's why in 1948, Mr. Alioto and others were put in charge of this program called redevelopment. They made all kinds of promises to the Blacks that they would be able to come back into this community after the new homes were built, others were rehabilitated. But they didn't keep that promise. The certificates that they were given were not honored. And that's why today we are down to, I repeat, 4.9% of the population.
You feel, however, that we're making progress in this country and worldwide?
No. I will never say that progress is being made. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. You pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that the blow made. They won't even admit the knife is there.
Problem. You guys pull the strings that close schools. You guys draw the boundaries that keep our kids restricted to the ghetto. You guys write up the restrictive covenants that keep us out of houses. So it's up to you to talk to your brothers and your sisters and persuade them that they have a responsibility. We've assumed ours for over 400 years, and we're tired of this kind of stuff now. We're not going to suffer patiently anymore. No more turning the other cheek. No more blessing our enemies. No more praying for those who despitefully use us. We're going to show you that we've learned the lessons you've taught us. We've studied your history, and you did not take over this country by singing "We Shall Overcome." You did not gain control of the world like you have it now by dealing fairly with a man and keeping your word. You're treaty breakers, you're liars, you're thieves, you rape entire continents and races of people. Then you wonder why these very people don't have any confidence or trust in you. Your religion means nothing. Your law is a farce, and we see it every day. You demonstrated it in Alabama. And I can say you, because you're part of the whole system, you profit from it. In fact, you make your living from it.
So we have to be prepared to call that violence. If you don't call zoning laws and redlining violence, even though it does violence, and you don't call it racism, then how are we going to solve that?
So that is, of course, I was, of course, combining different, of course, that really is important. Jibjaba says that really is important. So we have seen a lot of manifestation Jibby Jabba, of course, Jim Crow laws, and of course, segregation of African Americans, of blacks within the U.S. The 9 areas of influence of white supremacy. Okay. Jibby Jabba. So we have seen a lot of things happening. Of course, we have seen how different, of course, communities have been built up. We have seen how ghetto was created and how the government created ghetto in the U.S. Of course, basically for the black people. We see how religion, of course, is also impacting not only for Africans in Africa, but also within the African Americans. We see actually how these laws they shifted these laws to go to South Africa actually during apartheid, because during actually apartheid in South Africa, actually they wanted their system. Actually, all these whites, their system is the same. Let me say that. When you look at their system, they shifted their system directly to South Africa. They shifted it directly to South Africa, so that actually, when you look at the setting of South Africa, is no different from USA system of how blacks live in the Bantustan settlements, where you see only blacks within, because we have in South Africa, we have communities where we see only whites in South Africa. So it's not a joke, because these things still exist even up to now. If at all these Jim Crow days, laws, stuff, they ended, why do we still have to see, of course, people struggling, of course, in these ghettos, of course, people we see, of course, blacks being, of course, humiliated by police. When you actually, from 2024, when you look backward, when you look at the number of blacks that have been killed compared to the whites by police, not by gangsters or stuff, by police, there are very many compared to the whites. I don't normally see whites being killed by police directly. However, there might be some cases in the US. There might be some cases, but I don't see. But I've not seen something popping up like a white has been killed by fellow white man, by a fellow white police, or or a black person killing a white person, like police staff. I've not seen that. But all these things were designed, of course, to Jibijaba says the 9 areas: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex work. Okay, Jibijaba. Michelle E says, very good program today. Thank you, Michelle E. Jibijaba says, yes, appetite was modeled after Jim Crow's. True, because when you look at the creation of the Bantustan, those settlements for the blacks in South Africa, Jibijaba, these settlements were majorly made for the blacks, not for the whites. When you look at the whites, however much they are poor whites in South Africa, but you can't see them living ghettos compared to the blacks, the black natives in South Africa. So so these are, of course, and there is nothing changed with I don't know much about this Jim Cross GBJ, but did they have any, like, you had to present an ID? You know, in South Africa, people had to present IDs, like actually they would write something on a small box. They put it in your neck, including your name. My name is INNOSSETU. I'm this year old. I live in this, of course, Bantustan settlement. Identification. You had to be identified before you move. You had not to travel with other people in, of course, during public transport. Let's be train, bus stuff. When it comes to accommodation or bars, the white bars should be separate from the black bars. because after Africans used to live in the ghettos, so they had no way to get access to those, of course, modified bars and of course recreation centers. And we see that the Jim Crow, however much, yep, work papers of proof and residency, or you would be charged of bankers and jail. Maria Jangoyo, Maria. Yogerako mukwano.
Wanje.
Akayogere nga amaze kuzuukuka.
Temutwala bwetu. Azuukuse. Bakyokebwa ebyo enkuba etonnya kyova tebalina nawe bamutwala. Mucheri, shaka tagia kulya mucheri. He just needs something to drink. I believe hi Jaba 809. Hi Jaba, hope you're doing good. I believe that this the Jim Crow situation, like Jaba said, I was reading his comment here. Let me try to scroll back up. Like Jaba said that the 9 areas: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And of course, this exercise or this system is not only, by the way, seen in the United States. The only difference is when it comes to Africa, we do not have a lot of bazungus. But if you look at the entire structure system, if you look at the kind of, it is very surprising that America, during those days in America, people had education, but of course, different textbooks were meant for the Black Americans and the white. They had different textbooks during, of course, school. So Black children would have a different, that means Black children had a different kind of education compared to the white, even if they were in the same school, which was hard to find a Black person sharing the same school with a white person. But this is not only seen in South Africa. Yes, it is visibly seen in South Africa during the apartheid policy, because we had a lot of whites over there, and this was so, the hitting was so hard and everyone could see it. Now with other places in Africa, it is still the same system. And this is maybe why a lot of people are so relaxed, because there is no comparison. But you can tell me something. Why should Europe decide the kind of education system Africans should be having? And if at all we are to compare the kind of education system that Africa is having, you cannot, it cannot be compared to theirs, yet they are crediting. If you decide to introduce your own, it is not credited. When you study, let me say, for example, in Uganda, and you graduate and you travel to probably Canada, before even you are given a job, you still have to go back and study. All right? Why should you go back and study? Yet these are the very people who are designing what you should study, but they don't trust what you studied to be used. That there is a disservice in the entire education system. The same thing goes with health. All right, and so on and so forth. So I think what is hitting the Black people in the US is hitting apparently all Black people in the entire world. This is a structure that has been designed to keep Black people the way they are. And I know the moment people talk about racism, everyone is like, you are not allowed to, you are not allowed to talk about racism.
So actually, Jibjaba, I don't know actually the real statistics, but at least each year we hear about the news of of course, a black that has been killed, and these are people that we get to know about. A black in the U.S. who is being killed by police. I remember actually, like we started actually, for me, I started following up issues very well of actually how of course the police brutality within the U.S. towards the black people, starting with George Floyd. That's how I started, of course, balancing the both in understanding issues concerned with killing black people. It started for me. It started with George Floyd, of us and all other people, all other black people that have been killed in between there terribly, actually yelling for their lives. But we have not seen any white being, of course, being killed. However, these people, these policemen, at a time they are sentenced to, of course, sorry, they are sent to jail stuff. But why do we keep seeing this happening in police? Because it is a policy. Why do we see this in police?
First of all, I think then before even we look at a specific organization like police or whatever, I think if at all we are to look at the prisons, it's like the prisons in the US were created for the black people, because it is easy for the black person to be sentenced than a muzungu, okay, than a muzungu. And and I don't know, there is a created that the moment you look at a black person in the US, it's like you're looking at a criminal. And it takes and they created that environment, and a lot of people are ignorant about this, by the way. And of course, when it's like we have seen situations where they ask black people to, of course, raise their hands up and put their hands on the cars and whatever, and some others have been shot dead just because they were picking they were getting their cell phones from their pockets, and others were trying to pick keys and stuff. A lot of people have been killed like that because there is of course there is that mentality that they have put in the mind of not only people who don't know the black Americans, but even the people who are around them, even the black people themselves. Some of them be fearing each other, right? Because there is that feel that they cannot be trusted. They are so violent, all right? But yeah, I know we have seen a moment where we have seen a lot of black Americans being violent and very in an outrage way, because some of them have gone through a lot. I really understand. There is a moment where people feel like they have nothing to lose anymore, where people are tired. Nowadays, you can visibly see that. Police is like, put down your phones. Somebody's like, I'm not putting down on my phone, so you can do whatever it is. I rather die, but let the world see this. All right. Now, I understand that situation as well, but everything is apparently exaggerated because there is no race that has not gone through shit. All right. We have seen robbers, we have seen murderers, we have seen people we have seen shooting and shooting of young children in schools by whites. And if it was to be a black man, then the world would be going berserk. But of course, since it's a white person, probably they have mental problems. They always have excuses to the crimes these people, of course, commit. And someone will come out with an excuse, he's shot because he was going through a lot of mental issues. Why is it that black people are not supposed to have mental breakdown with a lot of things that are going on around them? But of course, this is not I usually connect this with the history and the journey that black people have the rough journey, I call it, that black people have been taking on throughout history and up to date. And probably we don't know when this journey is going to end, but there is that rough road that has caused the roughness in people's reaction, judgment, that even the black people are even afraid of police. It doesn't matter whether the police is good or bad. They're just so afraid. The moment they see, they know they have come for me, whether you are innocent or not, because for them it doesn't matter. So if you understand that journey, and you will know. Of course, we've seen police. I'm not gonna say white people have not been arrested, or we've not seen shootings between police and white people, but it depends on who. But basically, it has always been other whites and the Mexicans having issues. I guess with the Mexican, it's always like the same. At times their lifestyle and they're compared to be just, at times they experience the same outrageous discrimination like the black people at some point, because I always see that also targeted in most cases. Ajib Jabba says that every white has been scammed and robbed by their own more than any black. The honest ones will tell you. You understand? But of course, yeah, Jibi Jabba. This is something, like I said, this is the same thing that runs in the mind of a lot of Africans down here. Somebody will say, "Oh, having a Muzungu neighbor, having a white or a black American neighbor in America, you rather have a Muzungu neighbor. You know you can be safe. You cannot trust having. Why shouldn't you? Because there is that mentality that these people have. Okay, there is that image, all right, that people have. And it is always wrong, because there is no community that has not experienced upside and downs, violence, and all that other communities are experiencing. Though we know when it comes to the black community, it is always extra, and it goes to the extreme. So police, and like Jib Jabba says, apparently police are supposed to be white. um Police are supposed to be white, and and yes, before we had, it is of recent that we are seeing black people joining police academies and of course graduating as police officers. But before, all the police were white. You could not see any black police. There were no black police. It is now that they want to break the issue of racism. We need to have whites in the police. We need to have whites. And I remember there is even a certain year where they were forcefully recruiting black Americans to join the military just to be taken on the front line to be killed. All right. But yeah, now even if we have the police working in the government, or the police, the black police, they still have little power, because you will find a place where they have employed, like on a patrol, you are having like 4 bazungus, and it is 1 black police officer, and then you are heading, of course, to a black community. And then even if you want to protect your brother, you're seen as black, there is other 4 police officers. You can't overcome them and the decisions they are making. So even the ratio to police and the community, the black police ratio is very small over the white. And if you look at the deployment, you realize that if at all they are to visit places where there are a lot of black people, you will see that still a lot of bazungu will come, and a few black police officers will be among these people, just to still overdrive the judgment on the decision making at the scene. Because if you are 1 policeman and you are having your other 4 fellow bazungus coming together with you in a hood where there are black people, that means even if they are in a wrong, it is very hard, it is very easy for them to overcome or to drive your judgment astray. And remember, if it's about the law in court, of course, the witnesses stand. This is something that is right. He's one, and the other colleagues are going to be witnesses against this case. All right. So at times, even the Black police officers, it becomes very hard for them to do the policing job appropriately, in of course coordination with the Black people in the hood, like where they've come at. And so though in some other areas we have seen by chance, I'm going to use that word, by chance, where we've seen Black police officers trying to protect their own, and it is by chance, like I said, and the government tried so much to make it so impossible for these people to act. And of course, Jib Jabba says, meanwhile, the Mzungu's neighbor is the first to call the cops on you or try to take over a part of the yard. Drive away. I think Vietnam, you meant that front line where apparently a lot of Black people, of course, a lot of Black people lost their lives during the war. Yes. Rocky police get sent to the worst neighborhood to season them. True that, Jib Jabba. True that.
Louisville police shot and killed 26-year-old Breonna Taylor in her apartment during what her family calls a botched drug raid.
Breonna Taylor was hit multiple times by gunfire and
Their
died.
22-year-old Stephon Clark was shot and killed by police in his grandmother's backyard. However, investigators found no weapons at the scene, only an iPhone.
Protesters clashed with police over the deadly shooting of Philando Castile last Wednesday.
Around the United States, there is outrage over the police shooting of Michael Brown.
As officers held him down on the ground and they shot and killed him for it.
I can't breathe. I can't move.
I've been waiting the whole time, man. Get up and get in the car.
Mama.
Get up and get in the car right.
I can't. That's stupid. My stomach hurts. My neck hurts. Everything hurts. There's some water or something. Please. Please.
Are you serious? Justice? No justice! No peace! No justice!
We're going to charge today. We are a physical representation of our support for George Floyd.
I'll tell you what freedom is to me. No fear. I mean, really, no fear. If I could have that half of my life, no fear. Lots of children have no fear. That's the closest way, that's the only way I can describe it. That's not all of it, but it is something to really, really feel.
George Floyd, a father, a brother, a son, another unarmed Black man killed at the hands of police. In the midst of a global pandemic and a chaotic presidency, Americans got to see the ugly underbelly of policing communities of color once again. The circumstances are all too familiar. Officers escalating a situation when it is not needed.
When I saw the videotape, the murder of Brother George Floyd, it filled me with a rage. And it reminded me of when I saw Oscar Grant's video and his murder. It reminded me of when I saw Philando Castile. It was like, enough is enough.
but it's been enough. It's been ridiculous. It's been beyond the pale of what any civilized society should tolerate.
I think for a lot of us who have been involved in this for a while, you know, it made us feel like we were looking at a lynching. Now, for people who hadn't slowed their life down enough to see that, I think they were shocked at what they were seeing.
Incomprehensible that something like that could happen. I don't know about you personally, but I hate to say it, it reminded me of some of the older guys that I worked with at MPD. It almost seemed as if he enjoyed what he was doing, and you knew that it was wrong.
You know, I'm sick to my stomach to think that, you know, that something like that could just happen, you know, over and over again, you know, and it's like, you know, I mean, you don't get the right to kill somebody. You don't get the right to abuse somebody.
But watching the video of George Floyd's death, slow, painful, excruciating, just was searing for me, as I know it was for so many families across the country, so many people of all colors, to watch somebody.
Excuse that may rest in the conscience of anyone that may have doubt as to George Floyd's fault or participation in anything. That had no legs to stand on, because he was not posing a threat. He was there on the ground, really helpless, and he still died.
All the times they've had police killings on video, and you know that they've had lots of police killings that weren't on video. You know, there's always been big uproars. But I think this one has packed a more powerful punch because people are now at home, you know, with nothing to do, you know, no distractions.
Seeing someone lose their life for over 9 minutes shakes the very core of our humanity. Disregard of an innocent life adds to that despair.
I think there was a few things that came into focus in this moment that we are now. So, you know, for a month or so prior to the George Floyd murder, we had a lockdown. People were in their homes who could be in their homes and connecting with each other through screens in a completely different way. So that's a part of it, right? We're starting to see into every aspect of people's intimate lives, and also glued to the television or to our screens to better understand what we can do to protect ourselves against a plague, if you will, that the president was calling a liberal hoax from the very beginning. Then you couple that with Ahmaud Arbery's murder. So I think people were already like, first of all, how are we just seeing this and this happened, you know, a month prior to getting this video, and the people still haven't been charged. And then all this stuff comes out about them, about what they believe, right? And then, of course, you see this video. And I think what actually happened is that there's a muscle memory that people have now around police violence and protest. So it's not the first time this has happened. And it's not
the first time.
It's not new to us. But I think over the last 7 years, we now have a consciousness that it's not enough to just watch it and be upset about it. That coupled with 4 years of a president who has literally opened the sewer grates and told white nationalists to come up out of the sewer and come be a part of our society, be a part of our government. I think all of those things have collided in such a way where people now, it's not just people turning up about police brutality and police violence. You notice, like, you can't spin this story any other way. Who comes out when there's protests? White militias. Who's driving through crowds in protests? White nationalists who are unabashed about their point of view. and who have the cover of the federal government.
Go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel.
My whole life's work has been about trying to figure out how do we keep Black people from experiencing the worst of the system while we are at the same time still experiencing an unbroken history of white supremacy, racial hierarchy, and state violence. I mean, I'm part of a Black church. I argue the Black church has 400 years of receipts of fighting against white supremacy every day. Every day Black folk in church wake up, we fighting against white supremacy.
I'm taking tabs, show enough stuff to grab like shirts and it hurt. Willing neck direct, took a poll cause our soul took control from the education of a TV station. But look around, there goes the sound of the rhythm, boom and pound. When I shut them down, I shut them down, shut them down, shut them down, I shut them down, shut them down, shut them down, I shut them down, shut them down, shut them down, I shut them down, shut them down, shut them down, I shut them down, shut them
The slow murder of George Floyd forever changed the city with a history of excessive use of force. It changed America, and it shocked the world. Our cities have burned, lives have been taken. The voice of the oppressed rise up when those voices go unheard.
So when they say, why do you burn down the community? Why do you burn down your own neighborhood? It's not ours. We don't own anything. We don't own anything. There is, Trevor Noah said it so beautifully last night. There's a social contract that we all have, that if you steal or if I steal, then the person who is the authority comes in and they fix the situation. But the person who fixes the situation is killing us. So the social contract is broken.
A movement started less than a decade ago takes front stage once again. It seems like it was only yesterday when the streets of America were filled up with similar protests and outrage from the killings of Oscar Grant, Michael Brown, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Eric Garner, Stephon Clark, Laquan McDonald, and Sandra Bland. This time it was different. But why?
I think there are a couple of things. I think the first thing that I'll say is we have a generational divide, or should I say a generational uprising. If you think about Trayvon Martin in 2012, those teenagers and let's say young people that are now protesting, let's say if they're 22, 21 years of age, they were 13 years of age when that happened. And they were already accustomed to being on their devices. And they probably had questions then. And now, after the string of events from Trayvon Martin to Michael Brown, to Eric Gardner, to Philando Castile, to Walter Scott, to Jordan Davis, to Laquan McDonald, and the list continues, Alton Sterling, the list goes on and on. At some point, I think as a 13-year-old, you may ask the questions, but now as you begin to live and maybe your cognitive reasoning is developing, you begin to ask questions because you're outside of your parents' home and now you're thinking for yourself. And so maybe you're saying that maybe something is wrong. So I think that there are questions that are unanswered.
I didn't know what I wanted to do in 4 years of college. I was like, I just want to help people and I want to, make my community better. So when I was done with college, I came home and decided to make an impact where I live. And I learned actually how to organize and build power here on the streets of Oakland. I started knocking on doors, talking to people with an organization that had initially started by fighting police brutality and police violence. 10 years of organizing in San Francisco, 5 or 6 years of organizing here in Oakland. And at a certain point, I felt it was important to get a clearer sense of what the landscape was nationally. It's fine to be a big fish in a small pond, but there's a lot you miss about the way that the world works and the way the country works. I joined an organization that organizes domestic workers. These are women who clean homes, who care for the people that we care for the most. My mother and my grandmother did domestic work. And it was a few short weeks before I joined that organization that I helped to create Black Lives Matter. No, I did not know that Black Lives Matter would become the force that it is today. Although I certainly want to say that it was something that I wished for, but couldn't station that we should try it. We should try to figure out how to create the kind of movement that could actually have impact for Black folks. Patrice and Opal and I, when we created Black Lives Matter, we started people who were angry about Trayvon being murdered and his killer being acquitted. And we wanted people to do something more than be angry on social media. We wanted people to do more than argue with each other about whether or not it was racist on social media. Because at the end of the day, that kind of liking, retweeting, sharing, arguing back and forth with somebody you've never met doesn't change policy. It doesn't change culture. It doesn't change the fact that mothers all over this country are dealing with deep losses as a result of our failure to actually deal with what it means to keep our communities safe, and who is responsible for that. There have been protests happening all over the globe, more protests than the whole last period of civil rights. And here we are, and you can't get anybody at the top of the ticket to acknowledge that all around them, people are turned up about the fact that Black people are being left out and left behind.
There have been many protests against police brutality and systemic racism in America's history. Some protests were a result of a community overwhelmed by the actions of law enforcement and the lack of accountability in the criminal justice system.
The only persons on the streets of Miami's riots are police, looters, and torchmen setting dozens of fires that are now burning out of control.
There are people being beaten. There is looting. It is a dangerous night in the city of Los Angeles.
Today's protests have come in many forms, from everyday citizens taking to the streets to activists launching social media campaigns. Modern-day athletes have leveraged their influence in exercising their right to protest peacefully, putting their livelihood and safety on the line.
I mean, ultimately, it's to bring awareness and make people, realize what's really going on in this country. There are a lot of things that are going on that are unjust, people aren't being held accountable for, and that's something that needs to change. That's something that, this country stands for: freedom, liberty, justice for all. And it's not happening for all right now.
Colin Kaepernick, he actually told a group of reporters yesterday that he's received death threats.
Everybody, and I mean everybody, can give back. It's our duty to help our neighbors. Walter Payton spent time with my coach, which in turn ended up having a strong impact on me, motivated me to try to have an impact on the world. We should all strive to be more like Walter Payton.
When you're black,
Thank you, God bless.
When you're white, it's called bullying.
We grew up in Denver, which is not a predominantly Black area. The one thing I learned to do at a young age is I learned that some people perceive me as dangerous. So I was taught that, hey, people might see you as a threat. So I naturally started putting on a big smile. As soon as I seen anybody, me flash a smile, let them know that I'm a friendly person. But, I feel like, the issue when it comes to, police brutality, a lot of it is deep rooted in the stigma of what a Black person represents. The idea of the Constitution, the idea of America is special. The problem is that America's never really lived up to the Constitution as a whole, not for everybody that lives in America. And I tell people all the time, I'm proud to be American. I grew up American, and I have no problem with being an American. I want to be American. I'm proud to be American. But America needs to do better for its people, and it's a real issue.
When I was a student at Bible College in 1999, I was physically and sexually assaulted by police officers. So I was a victim of police brutality while I was attending Bible College to be trained as a minister. And that trauma, that sexual and physical trauma at the hands of the police officers really forced me to have my own internal reckoning with how will I use my own call and my mission as a man of God, as a minister, as a community leader, to dismantle these systems. And that's what my work has been for the last 20 or so years. Well, obviously, after it happened to me, I was devastated. I was living with my pastor at the time in San Jose, and on my way home, and two officers pulled me over, pulled me out the car, grabbed my groin area, did a pretty much strip search on me with a gun, trained on me, and told me if I was Black, if I was in Alabama in 1950, they'd throw me in an empty field. One of them said it was going to break my effing neck. So I came out of that experience with wounds in my body that I still see today, from the handcuffs, the bruises. My spirit was deeply broken and traumatized. I was asking God why this happened to me. I'm out here on my way to heaven and so glad, But my young people told me in our Bible study some weeks later, this happened to them all the time.
In the 50-shot killing of Sean Bell, an unarmed man, on his wedding day. They were seriously wounded in the hail of gunfire. The shooting incident sparked strong reactions throughout the city, leading up to
Sean was my middle son. His gift from God was to play baseball and also to be an electrician. About maybe 3:45, I get a phone call saying Sean was in an accident. So the first thing I thought, okay, maybe a car accident, because he was the driver in the car. So I'm jumping up, getting ready, get to Jamaica Hospital. That's where I used to work. And when they escorted me, I'm seeing a lot of people outside the hospital. When they escorted me to this room in the hospital, I knew that was a room that was going to tell me something bad has happened to our son. Hearing 50 shots at his car,
November 25th, 2006, as he was leaving his bachelor party with two friends.
You have Sean Bell. He's going to get married. They're at a strip club, and they're undercover officers in the strip club who think they hear that someone has a gun. They go outside, and there's like a confrontation. Bell's in the car, and 50 shots.
like I said, that was the most horrific day, horrible day of my life. But I continued. That day, I couldn't believe, thinking that the wedding was supposed to be that night, 7 p.m. at La Bella Vita. Going to the beauty parlor, still thinking I'm going to a wedding. In void, in undisbelief, knowing what happened to my son.
Prosecutors said Sean Bell died needlessly at the hands of reckless New York City detectives. But the defense strategy was to discredit the civilian eyewitnesses one by one, to portray the surviving victims as lying opportunists, and the detectives as the only honorable, reliable witnesses.
During that time, hearing everything on April 25th, 2008, I'm thinking, okay, the judge is going to say guilty, guilty, because some things the judge said I could believe that was against the officers. No. After everything was said and done, not guilty.
Bell's family, the bitterness over the trial's outcome will most likely not fade away anytime soon. Hundreds of people spent the day outside the courthouse in Kew Gardens today. Many supporting the family, some so overcome by emotion they collapsed
Police Union,
in the street.
they say they're grateful for the acquittals.
this sends a message to New York City police officers that when you are in that position, when you are in front of that court bench, that you will get fairness.
How do I spell relief? N-O-T-G-U-I-L-T-Y, not guilty.
Judges, DAs, the police department all work hand in hand, and that's something that needs to be stopped.
Driving while black, a phrase all too familiar amongst African Americans. Deadly traffic stop encounters between black men and women and police are too commonplace. These tragic deaths usually end in the acquittal of officers or no charges at all.
Well, sir. Good. How are you? Good. Reason I put you over, your brake lights are out. So you only have one activated brake light, and that's going to be your passenger side one. Your third brake light, which is up here on top, and then this one back here is going to be out. You have your license and insurance? I have to tell you, I do have a firearm on me. Don't reach for it then. Don't pull it out. Don't pull it out.
Philando Castile, a 32-year-old school nutritionist, is shot and killed by former officer Geronimo Yanez.
We got pulled over for a busted tail light in the back. And the police he's covered. He killed my boyfriend. He's licensed. He's licensed to carry. He was trying to get out his ID and his wallet out his pocket, and he let the officer know that he had a firearm and he was reaching for his wallet, and the officer just shot him in his arm.
His death is filmed and streamed live all over the world as his girlfriend and a 4-year-old daughter watch him die.
Philando did nothing wrong. This man said, I have, a license to carry, and he went to get his documents and he shot 5 times. Like, why?
Court records dating back to 2002 showed that Philando averaged more than 3 traffic stops per year.
My name is John Troy, and I have the great honor of being able to serve the people of Ramsey County, Minnesota, as their elected county attorney, which includes the city of St. Paul and the surrounding suburbs. I was first elected in 2010, and so I've been in office since that time. In many instances, what I see happening in deadly force cases is that the officer actually created this situation by not following their training. There are many cases across America where if the officer acted differently, if they didn't assume that everybody around them was some deadly threat to them, that we would have very, very different outcomes. The Tamir Rice case in Cleveland strikes a chord where that particular officer created that situation, and they didn't have to end up shooting that boy. The case in my jurisdiction involving Philando Castile, the same thing, where he had all of these assumptions and he raced towards using deadly force when he didn't have to. Everything was telling him that he didn't have to. There was a young child, a 4-year-old child in that car. There was a woman with Philando Castile in that car. Why on earth would any human being shoot an officer in that particular situation? And the way that Philando disclosed beyond what the law ever required him to do. But he said, "Sir, I have to tell you that I do have a firearm on me." He said it that way, in the most disarming way. And for some reason, the officer raced to this conclusion that he was about to be shot.
Philando Castile, if you remember, in Minnesota, I believe he was pulled over 35 or 40 times. And many of those were because there was a warrant for his arrest, which sounds terrible. But actually, the warrant was for an unpaid court fee.
Yanez, a Minnesota police officer who fatally shot Philando Castile during a traffic stop last year, has been found not guilty of all 3 charges, including second-degree manslaughter.
Jurors found Yanez was reasonable in his decision to shoot. The jury also found him not guilty in 2 other counts of endangering Philando Castile's girlfriend, Diamond Reynolds, and her child.
Hours after a jury acquitted Yanez, Philando's mother, Valerie Castile, led protesters, shutting down parts of the city. The chant of "Philando, Philando" rang out as they marched down the highway in the dark of night.
What is it gonna take? I'm mad as hell right now. Yes, I am. My firstborn one son died here in Minnesota. Under the circumstances, just because he was a police officer, that makes it okay. Oh, now they got free reign. He's found innocent on all counts. He's shot into a car with no regard to human life, and that's okay. Thank you, Minnesota.
Yanez was allowed to resign from the force, only to take another law enforcement job in another. Today's stories are anything but a recent phenomenon.
I was asked to volunteer as kind of a statistical consultant for a statewide task force to look at traffic stops. And it turns out the state of North Carolina was the first state in the nation to mandate collecting data on every traffic stop, but nobody had ever looked at it. 5 years later, 7 years later, I think we published a book and finally got our hands around it. It was very difficult to work with, but the initial findings were that a black man has about twice the odds of being pulled over compared to a white man. And once they're pulled over, they've got about twice the odds of being searched after a routine traffic stop. And the experience of an African American in North Carolina is, is 4 times more likely just by getting in the car that drive down the street is going to lead to a search of the vehicle. And a search of the vehicle implies that the police officer has determined for some reason in his mind that you pose a potential threat, or that you are a suspect in some kind of criminal proceeding. Because if you're merely speeding or you ran through a stop sign, that doesn't mean that the officer needs to search your car. It's humiliating, it's alienating, it can cost a lot of money. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen associated with what we think of as a routine traffic stop.
Praise.
Oh man, I'm scared as heck.
You were just stopped.
I was just stopped about a month or so ago. Yeah, I mean, I'm just scared, and I'm not. My license is legit. My car is inspected. I'm not riding dirty, but it's just that thing that goes through you when you're being stopped. And he's like, well, why are you so nervous? Why not? When you look at the news and TV and see the things that are going on, yeah, I'm nervous.
I can't close if you don't open the door. Why can't you? Because I will not put my... Use your phone. It's in your lap right there. I just don't want to put my hands down. I'm really sorry. You just look at wrong. No. I've just seen way too many videos of problems. But you're not black. Remember, we only kill black people. Yeah, we only kill black people, right? All the videos you've seen, have you seen white people get killed? You have.
New video tonight of an officer
Officer involved shooting in Vallejo. It is disturbing. You hear the moment when 6 officers opened fire at a Taco Bell drive-thru, killing a local rapper.
Yo, there's like fucking 7 cops out here. They just blocked the drive-thru.
Gun.
The guy over there doesn't want to come out. I don't know why.
There's a gun in his lap. I'm gonna bust that fucking window. All right, car's locked. He's passed out, but the car is in drive. We need another unit.
As you'll see here is the car in the drive-thru during this welfare check. Police pull in front and behind the car. The driver fast asleep during this time, and then police realize he has a gun on his lap.
He's not up yet. Hey, keep your hands up! Well, David, 3 shots fired. Crossfire. Start code 3 medic. Let me see your hands! Put your hands up! All the officers are okay. Start code 3 medic.
Copied now. Medic is en route. Code 3 at this time. All units are okay.
Willie McCoy, a 20-year-old aspiring rapper, is tragically shot and killed by police while sleeping in his car. 55 rounds by 6 officers surrounding his car were fired, killing him instantly.
Murder. Pure, unequivocal murder. These are officers who are supposed to be there to protect and serve. So the lens that they should be looking at this through is, what is going on with this person? Why are they unconscious? Is this a medical emergency? And if it's not, and the brother just fell asleep, whether he's intoxicated, he's drunk, or whatever it might be, or he's tired from work, I mean, that's also a way to look at this, somebody who needs help. Instead, they came with a punitive, criminalistic perspective, which is, this is a criminal. And then they can't claim the idea that there was a gun, which you can't see in the video. And they claim that it's a gun. But before that, what's very crucial to understand is that they had already communicated what their intent was. If he moves, we're taking him out.
His death is all too common in a town with a notorious record of police violence against young Black men and women. More deaths and shootings against unarmed Black and brown citizens. The list goes on and on.
The officers thought the SUV the pair had just gotten out of was stolen. Police say they're looking into what happened, but deny any kind of racial profiling.
I've been drinking. Okay. I don't care about, I can walk home. I just don't want to be in violation of anybody. I can walk, my sister's house is right here.
Will you take a preliminary breath test for me?
Yes, I will.
Okay, just wait here while I grab it.
The individuals involved in his murder took away a man with children who depended upon their daddy on a daily basis.
Judy Scott, the victim's mother, clutched a picture of him in court today. She turned to Slager and said, "I forgive you." Slager began to cry. He told the court, "With my actions that day, Walter Scott is no longer with his family, and I am responsible for that."
There is a stark difference in the way that law enforcement deals with traffic stops in other communities, where officers have de-escalated the situation or used non-deadly force.
What's in the car?
Ow! Ow! Oh.
The officer.
Ma'am, I said you don't understand why
I'm not a man.
Well, I'm being
Why
polite.
are you in an unmarked car?
Okay, because I'm a part of the aggressive driver unit.
Do you have the power to do that?
Yes, I do.
Well, you're a double.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's remarkable to see how the officer remained polite to the woman, even as she disrespected him.
No one needs to take that shot. You're absolutely cold.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Sir, go back into your car. I'll be with you in a second.
You better check the registration on this plate soon, mister. Have a good day, Judge. You bet.
Black communities historically have a deep-rooted fear of being treated unfairly by police.
3 of the accused officers were acquitted of all charges, but the jury hopelessly deadlocked on one charge of excessive force under color of authority.
4 policemen did it. 4 policemen violated the law. Let's deal with that.
The anger is all over this nation. If this kind of event could happen to Rodney King, all of our lives, those of us who stand here this morning, could have been in that same position that he was in.
The history of the police started in colonial times before the founding of the United States. For 400 years, Black people have been criminalized by policing. Based on America's slavery past, slave patrols served as police for plantation owners. As America began to form, laws supporting use of force were created and woven into our Constitution.
In 1667, it was written into the law for the state of Virginia by Anglican men, so Christian men, because the debate was whether slaves or enslaved Africans could be proselytized, because if they were proselytized, it was customary, according to Anglican tradition, that Anglican and Christian brothers and sisters could not enslave one another. So if that's the standard of practice, that says when you come to enslave Africans, you don't recognize their humanity, nor do you see them as, if they are baptized and welcomed into the faith, they're not your brothers and sisters in Christ.
Between 1840 and early 1900s, policing was under tight control of the political elite. The communities most targeted by harsh policing tactics were recent European immigrants. As African Americans fled the horrors of the Jim Crow South, they too became victims of brutal and punitive policing in the northern cities where they sought refuge. 6 million Black people fled to the northern cities in the Great Migration. Yet the racism by police continued, based on bias limiting Black people's civil rights.
My people come here from Texas and from North Carolina. If you were Black in the Bay Area, you came from the South. Why did you come from the South? Because in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, our parents and grandparents were fleeing the violence of the Ku Klux Klan and racist police, and they got on a train and took the train to the last stop to get as far away from these white vigilantes in the South, and the last stop was the West Oakland train station. That's how a lot of Black people came here to work on the Naval Shipyard in Oakland, Hunters Point Shipyard in San Francisco. So Black people come from the South fleeing racial violence.
My father grew up in Alabama, and he had several horrible experiences with the police, and he would often talk about that.
So
I didn't talk about them.
So these are the slave codes as mentioned, but actually I'm going to mention a few of them, like 6. Movement restriction, where enslaved people needed passes to travel away from their plantation. In some cities, they had to wear tags indicating they were allowed to move. This is what was happening in South Africa during apartheid. A marriage restriction, enslaved people were often prohibited from marrying without their owner's permission. Of course, interracial marriages were also typically banned. There is also a prohibition on gathering. Large gatherings of enslaved people were usually forbidden to prevent rebellions within slaves. The slave patrols, these were groups of white men who enforced the slave codes, ensuring enslaved people did not escape or gather in large numbers. There is also a code about trade and commerce, where initially some enslaved people could trade goods, but over time laws restricted their ability to buy sell or produce goods. Then lastly, the sixth code was punishment and killing. Slave codes regulated how enslaved people could be punished. Owners were rarely penalized for killing any enslaved person, although some later laws imposed the restrictions. So, Jibijaba, those are some of the codes. Those are some of the slave codes.
With the hope that we would hate the police, he spoke about them to explain to us where he came from, the environment that he grew up in, why he left Alabama, how he came to New Jersey, and what motivated him to make sure that his family would do better.
We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality.
People who live in poverty and people of color have experienced a set of relations with the criminal justice system that people who look like me and people who live in my neighborhood and people who have professional jobs and who are white can't even understand. We can't even empathize because we can't even possibly conceive of a police officer who, to me, would never be disrespectful or unpleasant. How that police officer might behave differently on the other side.
This is the stuff that's been happening for years, for decades. And members of the Black community have been saying that this has been happening. With the increase in phone cameras, with body cameras, people are seeing the truth. People are seeing what Black communities had always known, is that there are a large number of very abusive officers. And so we're finally seeing the stories that we've been told.
According to Kentucky law, the use of force by Mattingly and Cosgrove was justified to protect themselves.